Daniel Carter had always believed he was living a simple, peaceful life. In his small Georgia town, people valued family, loyalty, and hard work. Daniel fit that image perfectly. He worked long hours as a carpenter, building homes for families, just like his own. His wife, Emily, was the town's beloved elementary school teacher. Their 2 children, Mason and Lily, were known by everyone in the neighborhood. Together, they looked like the perfect American family. People often said Daniel and Emily were the kind of couple others envied. But the reality inside their home was slowly unraveling. At first, Daniel noticed small changes. Emily started coming home later than usual, often blaming school meetings or grading papers. She kept her phone close, setting it to silent mode during dinner. Daniel wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He told himself she was just stressed from work. He even tried to be more supportive, offering to help with household chores or suggesting weekend trips together. But Emily kept pulling away, emotionally and physically. She no longer laughed at his jokes or asked about his day. The woman he had married seemed like a stranger living under the same roof. Daniel tried to ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. He reminded himself that marriages had ups and downs. After all, they had 2 kids to think about. He convinced himself that whatever Emily was going through, it would eventually pass. He thought of their wedding day, of the vows they exchanged, of the nights they spent talking about their future. That future felt fragile now, like glass about to shatter. In the town, gossip moved fast. Daniel began hearing whispers, though no one said anything directly to him. He noticed how people avoided his eyes at church or lowered their voices when he walked past. He pretended not to care, but inside, doubt gnawed at him. He even considered confronting Emily directly, but fear held him back. He didn't want to hear her confirm what he dreaded most. Instead, he chose silence, hoping ignorance would protect him. One evening, Daniel watched Emily through the window as she sat in her car long after pulling into the driveway. She stared at her phone, typing rapidly, a small smile on her face. When she finally stepped inside, she barely acknowledged him. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling utterly alone beside the woman he once loved so deeply. Then came the moment he could no longer ignore his fears. A neighbor casually mentioned that Emily had been seen at a coffee shop far from town, sitting with a man Daniel didn't know. When Daniel asked Emily about it, she brushed it off, saying it was probably a misunderstanding. But her voice trembled slightly, and Daniel caught it. For the first time, he saw fear in her eyes, not fear of danger, but fear of being discovered. Daniel's world felt like it was slipping through his fingers, but even then, he clung to hope. He believed that if he tried harder, loved more, he could fix whatever was broken between them. He didn't know that Emily's secret was already beyond repair. Something far bigger than small-town gossip was about to rip his life apart in a way he could never imagine. And soon, the whole town would watch the collapse of Daniel Carter's perfect marriage, not through whispers, but broadcast on television for everyone to see. The quiet town of Willow Creek had never seen anything like it. A popular TV show called Secrets in Small Towns had recently gained attention for exposing hidden affairs, secret addictions, and scandals in rural communities. People watched it for entertainment, never imagining their own lives could become its next headline. But everything changed when the show's producers received an anonymous tip about Emily Carter. It started with a single phone call to the show's hotline. The caller, whose identity was never revealed, claimed that Emily, the seemingly perfect schoolteacher, was having an affair with a man from a nearby town. Intrigued, the producers sent a small crew to investigate quietly. They knew a story involving a respected teacher in a tight-knit community would attract massive attention. Daniel had no idea that strangers with cameras were now tracking his wife. The crew followed Emily after school, filming her as she drove to unfamiliar places. She was seen meeting a man outside a motel on the outskirts of town. A man identified later as Brandon Lewis, a divorced father whose son attended Emily's school. Hidden cameras caught the two laughing, exchanging kisses, and walking into motel rooms together. Over several weeks, the show collected hours of incriminating footage. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his routine, oblivious to the unfolding nightmare. He still woke up early, packed his children's lunches, and worked long days in his workshop. In the evenings, he sat in silence as Emily claimed exhaustion from work and avoided conversation. His trust in her, though fragile, remained intact. He believed in their marriage, unaware that it was being dismantled behind his back. When the producers felt they had enough evidence, they began editing the episode. Unlike their usual scandals, this one felt personal. Emily's reputation as a beloved teacher added an extra layer of shock value. They created dramatic narrations, slow-motion scenes, and emotional music to enhance the betrayal's impact. The episode was promoted for 2 weeks before airing, teasing viewers with blurred images of a woman and hints of a shocking betrayal in a peaceful southern town. On the night of the broadcast, nearly everyone in Willow Creek tuned in. Families gathered in their living rooms, expecting drama but never imagining it would involve someone they knew. As the episode unfolded, faces turned pale. Friends, neighbors, and parents watched in disbelief as Emily Carter was exposed on national television. Every handshake, every laugh, every motel visit was shown in painful detail. Daniel sat frozen in his living room, his hands trembling. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. He hoped somehow that the show had made a mistake. But when the footage clearly showed Emily's face, smiling in another man's arms, his world shattered. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was undeniable in public. What made it worse was the betrayal of trust, not just from Emily, but from the entire town. Daniel realized people had suspected for weeks and said nothing. His private life, his humiliation, was now everyone's. Entertainment. Neighbors whispered about him. Children's friends asked awkward questions at school. His children didn't understand why their mother stopped coming home. Emily, after the episode aired, didn't even try to explain. She packed her things and moved in with Brandon. She didn't leave a note. She didn't call Daniel. She simply disappeared from the home they had built together. The TV show got what it wanted: ratings, attention, and scandal. But for Daniel, it marked the moment his life broke beyond repair. The betrayal was no longer a secret. It was public knowledge. And that public exposure did something to Daniel. It planted a dark thought in his mind. If everyone now saw him as a fool, maybe it was time they saw him as something else. In the days following the broadcast, Daniel Carter's world grew darker with every passing hour. The life he had known was gone. Emily had not only betrayed him, but humiliated him in front of an entire town. He could no longer walk into the grocery store without feeling eyes burning into his back. People no longer saw Daniel as the hard-working family man. Now he was the man whose wife had publicly shamed him. His children asked questions he couldn't answer. Mason wanted to know when his mother was coming home. Lily cried at night, confused and scared. Daniel felt powerless. He wasn't just losing his wife, he was losing his family. Every time he tried to hold himself together, a fresh reminder of Emily's affair dragged him back into despair. He stopped returning phone calls from friends. He stopped answering the door. He spent hours sitting silently in his darkened living room, staring at nothing. But silence eventually gave way to obsession. The images from the TV show replayed in Daniel's mind like a sick movie. Emily's smile, the motel room, the other man's face. It haunted him day and night. He couldn't sleep, and when he did, nightmares woke him screaming. The pain inside him became unbearable, and slowly that pain turned into anger. He began to convince himself that Emily had not just hurt him, she had destroyed his life. Every humiliation, every whisper from a neighbor, every tear from his children felt like another wound she had inflicted. He started believing that she had chosen to ruin him. That belief was dangerous. It led him down a path where revenge felt not just justified, but necessary. Daniel pulled out his father's old shotgun from the storage shed. He hadn't used it in years, but he cleaned it carefully, as if preparing for something inevitable. Each motion felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. He didn't tell himself he was going to kill Emily, at least not at first. But as the days passed, his thoughts grew darker, and the lines between anger and action blurred. He started driving past Emily's new apartment. He knew where she lived now, with the man who had stolen her from him. Daniel watched from a distance as Emily carried groceries inside, as she laughed on the phone, as she lived a life without him. Seeing her happy without him deepened the rage in his heart. He couldn't understand how she had moved on so easily while he was drowning. At night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the shotgun resting in front of him. He thought about his children, how they would grow up knowing their mother had left them. He thought about the people in town who whispered behind his back. He thought about the man who had taken everything from him. The more he thought, the more twisted his reasoning became. In his mind, taking Emily's life wasn't murder, it was justice. One rainy morning, after another sleepless night, Daniel made his decision. He loaded the shotgun. He knew where she would be and when she would be alone. He rehearsed every step in his mind, telling himself this was the only way to end the humiliation, the pain, the endless whispers. He didn't see Emily as a person anymore. He saw her as the source of his suffering. As he stepped outside into the cold rain, Daniel felt something unexpected, a sense of calm. His mind was clear for the first time in weeks. He believed he had found the solution. And once it was done, he thought, the pain would finally stop. The rain fell steadily as Daniel parked his truck a few blocks from Emily's apartment. He sat in silence, watching the drops slide down the windshield, gripping the shotgun on the seat beside him. Hours passed. He waited, unmoving, his mind empty of doubt. He believed this moment was inevitable, that fate had led him here. Each second ticking by only strengthened his resolve. From the shadows, Daniel watched the apartment door. He knew Emily's new life was inside those walls. A life she had chosen without him. A life she had built on betrayal. He waited until Brandon left for work, just as he did every evening. Daniel watched him drive away, his taillights fading into the rain. That was the moment Daniel had been waiting for. He stepped out of the truck, pulling his coat tighter as the rain soaked through. The shotgun felt heavy but familiar in his hands. His boots splashed in puddles as he moved toward the apartment door. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. His body moved on instinct, driven by the rage that had consumed him for weeks. The door gave way with a single hard kick. Emily screamed when she saw him standing there, soaked and armed, but Daniel heard nothing. His heartbeat drowned out everything else. He saw her face twist in terror, but it didn't slow him down. The shotgun rose in his hands, steady and deliberate. The first shot roared through the small apartment, striking Emily in the shoulder. She collapsed to the floor, crying out in pain, crawling in desperation. Blood spread across the tile as she tried to escape, but Daniel stepped closer. His expression remained blank. He saw no wife, no mother of his children, only the woman who had humiliated him. The second shot tore into her chest. Emily's body went still. Daniel stood over her, breathing heavily, his arms trembling now that the act was done. But instead of relief, emptiness washed over him. He waited for the satisfaction he had imagined, but all he felt was hollow silence. Outside, neighbors, who had heard the gunshots, called 911. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second. Daniel didn't run. He couldn't. He dropped the shotgun beside Emily's motionless body and sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. He stared at nothing, numb and expressionless. Minutes later, police officers burst through the broken door. Guns drawn, they found Daniel sitting quietly next to his bleeding wife, his clothes soaked in rain and her blood. He offered no resistance. When an officer asked him what had happened, Daniel's voice was calm and detached. He simply said, "She destroyed everything." Emily, though critically wounded, was alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, working frantically to stabilize her. Daniel watched from the back of the police car as they loaded her body into the ambulance, red lights flashing through the rain. He said nothing as they drove him to the station. That night, news of the shooting spread through the town. People who once admired Daniel now spoke his name with horror. The TV show that had exposed Emily's affair aired a follow-up special, detailing how their episode had led to a near-fatal shooting. Viewers watched as their entertainment turned into tragedy. Daniel Carter, once a devoted husband and father, now sat alone in a cold jail cell. The man who had built homes for others had destroyed his own in a single violent moment. And as he stared at the concrete walls, he realized too late that nothing could undo what he had done. Asterisk against all odds, Emily survived. Doctors at the local hospital worked through the night to stabilize her. 2 bullets had torn through her shoulder and chest, causing massive blood loss, but none had struck her heart. She was unconscious for days, hooked up to machines, fighting for her life. The town held its breath as people waited to hear if she would live or die. Rumors filled the silence. Some said she deserved what happened. Others whispered that Daniel had finally lost his mind. But no one could ignore what had happened anymore. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in jail, numb and silent. He refused visitors. He ignored questions from detectives. He ate little, spoke less, and spent hours staring at the floor of his cell. He didn't ask about Emily. He didn't ask about his children. The rage that had consumed him for weeks had burned out, leaving behind only emptiness. When he closed his eyes, he saw the moment she fell to the floor. He heard the gunshots in his mind over and over. He thought pulling the trigger would end his suffering. Instead, it only created a deeper kind of pain. And now there was no way back. When Emily regained consciousness, she was weak but alive. She couldn't speak for several days. When doctors finally allowed her to talk, detectives asked if she wanted to press charges. Her answer was simple. She would testify against Daniel. She wasn't the same woman who had once smiled for family photos or played in the backyard with their children. That version of Emily had died on the floor of her apartment. What remained was a woman who had seen death too closely to ever be the same. The trial became the event everyone in Willow Creek followed. Reporters filled the courtroom. People camped outside the courthouse, waiting for updates. The town's dirty secrets were now public knowledge, and people wanted answers. The prosecution painted Daniel as a cold, calculating killer. They showed evidence of how he had cleaned a shotgun, how he had waited outside Emily's apartment for hours, how he had fired not once, but twice, aiming to kill. Witnesses described the scene, the blood, the shattered door. Emily, pale and frail, took the stand and told the jury exactly what had happened that night. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. Daniel's defense team argued for temporary insanity. They claimed the TV show's public exposure of Emily's affair had driven Daniel to a mental breakdown. They described how humiliation, betrayal, and social isolation pushed him beyond reason. But the jury saw the facts. Daniel hadn't snapped in a moment of passion. He had planned it. He had loaded the gun. He had waited for the right moment. And he had pulled the trigger twice. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty, second-degree attempted murder. Sentenced to 25 years in prison. Emily never returned to her old life. She sold the house. She moved far away, taking the children with her. Brandon, the man she had left Daniel for, disappeared soon after the trial ended. Some said he couldn't handle the shame. Others said he was afraid for his own safety. Either way, Emily was left alone, carrying the scars, both physical and emotional. Daniel began his prison sentence with little emotion. His life, as he had known it, was over. In interviews later, he said he didn't regret pulling the trigger. He only regretted that Emily had survived. His words chilled everyone who heard them. The case of Daniel and Emily Carter became a national sensation, a story of betrayal, public humiliation, and cold revenge. People debated for years whether Daniel was a monster or a man broken beyond repair. But one fact remained clear. Once love turned to betrayal and betrayal to violence, nothing could ever be made right again.